Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. Happy homecoming. Hope you've enjoyed the programming throughout the week thus far. We've got a great event this afternoon for you. For anybody who does not know me, I'm Alex Geren, the Associate Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement on the DeLand campus of Stetson University. Again, thank you all for taking the time this afternoon to tune in. And we've got a great presentation on Stetson University presidents as we take a look through their history. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sue Ryan, our Dean of the Library and Learning Technologies, and my fantastic partner in crime in these virtual events.
Absolutely. I love working with Alex because he pushes all the buttons and makes all the technology happen, and I just have to talk. So it's great to have him with me. And thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate seeing the board members who are coming in, and Dr. Libby, it's such an honor to have you and Richard here. I will say before we start that I've given this presentation to a few retired faculty and some staff members, and I get really funny responses. And that is, somebody will tell me, you know, you were a little too hard on that particular president, and I didn't think I was. And then from the next person I would get, you were did not say, you know, enough good things about that same president. So I have learned that presidents are in the eye of the beholder and how they feel about them. But my job today is just to tell you some of the facts about our Stetson presidents. And whenever you want to get started, Alex, we'll put the PowerPoint on, and I'm going to turn off my camera so you can see the presentation. And then after we're done, I'm happy to try and answer your questions, or you can put comments in the chat, and Alex will help me get to those.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll go ahead and put that PowerPoint up on the screen. And for anybody that's tuning in just a couple minutes late, as long as you can see and hear us on the screen, you are good. I'll throw up that presentation. And like Sue said, if you have any questions or comments throughout, please feel free to drop those in the chat box and we will address those towards the end of the presentation. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and I hope everybody enjoys.
And there we go. So Stetson University has had 10 presidents since its founding in 1883. As you can see, 7 of those 9 served a decade or more. This presentation focuses on the first 8 presidents, and especially the earliest presidents. We are not covering our last 2 presidencies as they are too recent for us to provide any real historical context. But I want to acknowledge the significant contributions of Wendy Libby during her 11 years as president, and Chris Rolke's leadership during an unprecedented set of pandemic challenges at the beginning of his presidency. Each Stetson president moved the campus forward in a variety of ways. We'll walk through history together and discover how the university developed under each of these administrations. Stetson University was founded in 1883 as DeLand Academy, a prep school, basically a private elementary and secondary school, founded by town founder Henry DeLand. The entire school was housed in one building, DeLand Hall. A year after the school was founded, John B. Stetson and his wife Elizabeth arrived in DeLand and bought up a lot of land and citrus groves in the town. Soon after the Stetsons arrived, Henry DeLand asked John B. Stetson to donate to his school, which had recently added a university curriculum and the new name of DeLand College. John B. Stetson agreed and began a decades-long history of giving to the university. In 1887, the state chartered the university, and John B. Stetson joined the Board of Trustees. In 1889, John B. Stetson would be named president of the board. DeLand College became DeLand University, which in turn became John B. Stetson University in 1889 in gratitude for Stetson's generous funding. In 1885, the Florida Baptist Convention began supporting Henry DeLand's college as a Baptist school, and the convention endowed the college with $10,000. Also in 1885, one of the trustees recruited New York College professor John Forbes to become the college's first president. John and his wife Ida and their family would move to DeLand in the summer of 1885. John Forbes had a successful career at the State Normal School in New York. A normal school was basically a college that trained teachers. Forbes took a great risk by coming to a very isolated Central Florida town to head a brand new college. At that time, the railroad didn't even come to DeLand, and the roads were all dirt. Nevertheless, this was an opportunity to grow a college from scratch, and Forbes enthusiastically began his 2-decade career at the university. Not only did Forbes become Stetson's president, but he also taught classes in psychology, ethics, and political economics. His presidency is known for early growth of the number of students, the number of faculty, and the number of buildings. He recruited quality faculty, mostly from the North, and he had a clear vision to create a high-quality institution. In the early years, Forbes affiliated Stetson with the University of Chicago, one of the country's best universities at the time. The agreement, which lasted about 10 years, allowed Stetson students who earned all A's during their time at Stetson to automatically earn a University of Chicago degree as well as a Stetson degree. The University of Chicago also provided Stetson's library with a free copy of every book published by their university press. Forbes started Florida's first law school, and he expanded the campus from 1 to 7 major buildings. Perhaps most importantly, he cultivated a close relationship with John B. Stetson, who was key to keeping the university financially viable in the early decades. In this photo, you see John Forbes standing with the faculty and John B. Stetson. This is the only known photo of John B. Stetson actually wearing a hat. This photo, by the way, is featured in a documentary titled The Cowboy Hat Movie that's currently streaming on Amazon. It's interesting to note that the very first Stetson University graduate in 1893 was a female student, Leila Mae Child. Every Stetson president, from John Forbes to Wendy Libby, has grown the physical campus with new buildings. Forbes worked with John B. Stetson to add the school's first dormitory in 1890, followed quickly by a large home for the president and his family, and the campus's first gymnasium. A large academic building, Elizabeth Hall, followed, then the second and third dormitories, Shadoan Hall and Conrad Hall. The original Conrad Hall, which was a wood structure, would burn down just 2 years after it was built. A second large academic building, originally called Science Hall, was built in 1903 across the street from Elizabeth Hall. The building was largely anonymously funded by Henry Flagler, and it was renamed for him in 1913 after his death. Forbes is seen here with the faculty outside of Elizabeth Hall in 1892. Under the Forbes administration, Florida's first law school was established at Stetson in 1900. At the time, students could get law degrees right out of high school. Forbes hired Albert Farrar to be the first law school dean, and the school started with 5 students, added a few more, and the first 6 graduated in 1902. The law school was housed in Flagler Hall with a mock courtroom and a law library in the southeast corner of the building. One of the first 4 law school faculty members was a woman, Annie McLean, who taught constitutional law. It should be mentioned that in 1905, Stetson became the first law school to admit women, and in 1908, Mary Stewart would become Stetson's first female law graduate and the first woman to earn a law degree in Florida. By the time Forbes left Stetson, the campus looked like it does in this slide, the numbers showing the order the buildings were built. Every building built during the Forbes administration, with the exception of Flagler Hall, had been largely funded by John B. Stetson. The almost 2 decades-long Forbes administration would end in scandal. Forbes was accused of an illicit relationship with a female teacher who was living in Shadoan Hall during the summer of 1901. Forbes' wife and children, as was their custom, were in New York for the summer months. Rumors about the relationship disrupted campus life, and as classes started up in the fall, many of the students and faculty were calling for some type of action to be taken, with some students threatening to leave the university because of the scandal. John B. Stetson, as president of the Board of Trustees, decided to hold hearings about the scandal in his downtown DeLand hotel. He called in witnesses who claimed to have seen or heard things about Forbes and the woman. 3 men served as the judges: John B. Stetson, another trustee, and a visiting professor from the University of Chicago. Mr. Stetson would later say that he fully expected to hear the witnesses and then declare his good friend, President Forbes, innocent so that the university could get back on track. But it turned out that the witnesses were very compelling, and President Forbes was asked to resign. Forbes would not immediately agree to resignation, however, and the three judges, fearing that Forbes refusing to resign would make things even worse for the university, told the Stetson community that Forbes had not been proven guilty and that there should be a cessation of all conversation about the matter. Unfortunately, this just ensured that the scandal would grow, and Forbes decided to fight a public relations battle with Mr. Stetson. Ultimately, the Board of Trustees would side with President Forbes, leaving John B. Stetson, Henry DeLand, and one other trustee as the only dissenting votes. This caused a split in the board that would lead to the university's major benefactor, John B. Stetson, being removed as president of the Board of Trustees. It cannot be overstated how disruptive this was to the university. The Volusia County Press and other Florida newspapers almost unanimously criticized the university for its treatment of John B. Stetson, which fueled the scandal. Most of the newspapers suggested that the evidence against Forbes was strong, and they said that guilty or not, Forbes could no longer be effective as president of the university. Forbes also realized that he no longer had the moral authority to lead the university, and he finally submitted his resignation. The resignation was accepted, and Dr. Charles Ferris, a professor of Greek who had been at the university since 1892, was named interim president. John Forbes returned to New York, where he would go on to found the Rochester Business Institute. While this was a dark spot on Stetson's history, an unintended bit of positive public relations resulted. In the press reports about the scandal, John B. Stetson University was almost always referred to as the best educational institution in Florida or the best university in the South. While Forbes' personal reputation was surely damaged, the university retained and even grew its reputation for high quality education. Choosing the next Stetson president would be critical. Because of the strong ties between Stetson University and the University of Chicago, Stetson trustees looked to the University of Chicago president, William Harper, to guide them in their search. Harper suggested one of Chicago's former PhD students, Lincoln Hulley, who was at the time a professor of history at Bucknell University. Although it took some persuading to head south to Florida, Hulley eventually agreed and was elected unanimously by the Board of Trustees at a whopping salary of $4,000 a year. On the opening day of fall semester 1904, Hulley walked onto the stage in the Elizabeth Hall Chapel and was greeted by enthusiastic cheers by the students and faculty. Dr. Libby, that might remind you of another day in Stetson history. The choir sang the new president's favorite hymn, Holy, Holy, Holy. It was sometimes jokingly suggested that he liked this hymn so much because it sounded like Hulley, Hulley, Hulley. Although he had no way of knowing it at the time, Hulley would go on to be Stetson's longest serving president, serving in that position for 30 years. One of the first things Hulley did was to mend fences with John and Elizabeth Stetson. Mr. Stetson came back on the Board of Trustees as its president once again and began to offer financial assistance as he had in the past. John B. Stetson, however, would pass away unexpectedly in 1906, soon after Hulley became president. Hulley more than doubled the student body from 200 to 500 and built 6 major new buildings. Under Hulley's administration, the academy was closed in 1925, and John B. Stetson University would focus solely on higher education from that time on. Hulley was a tireless university advocate and marketed Stetson's high-quality education to anyone who would listen. He was the first to use regular direct marketing practices at Stetson. For years, Hulley sent every Florida high school senior a copy of the university's weekly student newspaper throughout the months of March and April. This meant mailing out about 3,000 copies a week. While the life of the university president today is more than a full-time job, Hulley apparently had time for other pursuits during his decades as president. In 1918, he was elected to the Florida State Senate and served for 2 terms. In 1920, he ran for governor, but he lost that election. But in 1933, he served on the personal staff of Florida Governor David Schultz, Stetson alumnus. Hulley fancied himself a great scholar and orator. He was a prolific playwright, and he often had the Stetson theater students perform his plays on campus. He also wrote songs about the university that the students would sing. It's been reported that the longtime head of the theater department, Irving Stover, considered Hulley's plays low quality and hard to stage, and said they had no real drama and there was no point to them. Nevertheless, Stover felt pressured by Hulley to produce the plays. Hulley twice named himself Dean of Stetson's Law School. The first time was in 1909, when the first dean of the law school, Dean Farrar, left Stetson to start a law school at the University of Florida. Not only did Farrar begin competing with Stetson for law students, but he also began actively trying to recruit current Stetson law students to go to the University of Florida. Hulley was furious, and he decided to run the law school himself, and he did so for the next 5 years. Finally, Hulley decided he needed a new law school dean, and he hired Richmond Rasco in 1914. Rasco doubled the enrollment at the law school and was very popular with students and other faculty. He and Hulley never got along well, however, and there's a long floating story that in 1921, Rasco threw an ink bottle at Hulley in a particularly severe argument. Rasco would leave Stetson soon after that incident and followed the first dean to the University of Florida. But even worse, in Hulley's mind, Rasco would go to the University of Miami in 1926 and start yet another competing law school. Hulley, once again furious with his former law school dean, named himself dean of the law school, a position he would serve in until 1929. During his tenure, Hulley built new buildings to accommodate a growing number of students and classes. In 1908, the first freestanding library was built. Then came the rebuilding of Conrad Hall after it had burned down. Conrad is still in use as a dormitory today. 2 years later, John B. Stetson's widow, Elizabeth Stetson, helped fund Cummings Gymnasium, which was built to replace the small wood gym that Mr. Stetson had built in 1891. No new buildings would be built for the next 18 years as Stetson lived through the World War I and post-war years. The first post-war campus building was a large gymnasium named Hulley Gym, built in 1929. It sat where the Edmunds Center now sits. The next year, Hulley built a theater building, which was originally called Assembly Hall and later Stover Theater, after longtime theater professor Irving Stover. Hulley was criticized for building a theater as the country was experiencing the start of the Great Depression, and Stetson's finances were starting to feel the effect of economic turmoil. Many thought he was building the theater as a vanity project, just to have a building in which to produce his own plays. To save money, Hulley had the building made without blueprints, which resulted in the stage being too small and leaving almost no space behind the stage for actors to enter and exit. Some believe that Hulley deliberately eliminated a backstage area so that male and female students would not have a dark place to meet and steal a kiss. The beams that held the lights were not structurally sound and would have to be replaced in just a few years. Nevertheless, with all its deficiencies, when the building was completed, it was an attractive addition to the campus, and Stetson was the only university in Florida at the time to have a theater building. The last building that Hulley planned was the Hulley Tower, built as a gift to the campus from Hulley and his family. Unfortunately, Dr. Hulley would pass away from a sudden heart attack before construction was completed in 1934. The tower was built to hold the Eloise chimes, a set of bells that had originally been placed in the cupola of Elizabeth Hall, but turned out to be too heavy for that structure. Music students would go into the tower daily and play the bells, a tradition that continued until the early 2000s when the tower was taken down due to extensive structural damage. The bottom of the tower, which remains, is a mausoleum in which Lincoln Hulley and his wife are interred. It is said that their dog is also buried in the tower, but we have no proof of that particular Stetson legend. Hulley, Stetson's longest serving president, was not particularly popular with students or faculty. He ran the university with an iron fist, and he left little room for discussion or any other way of doing things than his. At the time of Hulley's death, the Great Depression had greatly affected Stetson, and the university's financial situation was precarious. The Board of Trustees would next look for a president who could govern during difficult times and bring some unity to Stetson. John B. Stetson Jr. was the president of the Board of Trustees when Hulley passed away. He promised the faculty that the board would select a suitable president. They would look for a rather young man of high intellectual attainments with the customary degrees, a proper personality, progressive ideas, and enthusiasm for building a great educational institution. They found William Sims Allen, who had recently served as acting president of Baylor and had also been a Baylor dean and vice president. Allen assumed the presidency in 1934 and would deal effectively with Stetson's financial issues, guiding the university through the Depression and into the World War II years. He instituted the first facilities management programs to take care of the campus buildings, many of which were in significant disrepair. He grew the student body from 500 to 2,700. Under Allen's administration, separate music and business schools were established, and he improved the quality of the law school. While Stetson has sometimes had rocky relationships with the Florida Baptist Convention, an organization that provided funding to Stetson, Allen was very well liked by the Baptist Convention members, and relations with the convention were very good during his presidency. Allen built the first Commons building for students in 1937. That would be destroyed by fire in 1954. He also had additions built on to both Stetson Hall and the campus print shop. Overall, most people considered Allen's presidency successful. When William Sims Allen fell ill as a result of a heart condition in 1947, he told the board that he would resign because Stetson must have vigorous leadership. The Board of Trustees thanked Allen for his service by naming him President Emeritus, and they provided Allen with an annual $5,000 stipend for the rest of his life. Allen moved back to his home state of Texas, where he would live a few more years until he passed away in June of 1951. The board returned next to one of Stetson's own to become the university's fourth president. J. Ollie Edmunds, who held multiple Stetson degrees, had heard Lincoln Hulley speak about Stetson and entered the university as a freshman in 1921. He was the business manager of the student paper, editor of the yearbook, and was voted most intellectual boy at Stetson in his junior year. Edmunds appeared in at least 14 Stetson theater productions and worked as a janitor in Elizabeth Hall. He would go on to get a bachelor's, master's, and law degree from Stetson, and then went to work for a prominent DeLand law firm. He started his own law firm in his hometown of Jacksonville in 1929. A few years later, in 1931, Governor Doyle Carleton, a Stetson alum, named Edmunds to fill a vacancy as a judge in Duval County. During the time he was living in Jacksonville, Edmunds continued his involvement with Stetson, serving as president of the Alumni Association and as a Board of Trustee member. It is worth noting that Edmunds, who had spent most of his adult life connected to Stetson, experienced what was perhaps the most traumatic event of his life on Stetson's campus. In 1930, J. Ollie Edmunds had returned from Jacksonville to DeLand to visit his parents for Christmas. Ollie's father worked on the campus as the campus superintendent of buildings and grounds, and his parents lived on Stetson's campus in a house just north of Shadowan Hall. About 2 a.m. the morning of December 26, a man with a shotgun in hand broke into Shadowan Hall and walked into an unlocked room occupied by Mr. and Mrs. G.L. Horde. An altercation ensued, and Mr. Horde was able to push the man out into the hallway and lock him out. With no phone in the room, Mrs. Horde screamed out the window, and her cries were heard by Ollie and his father next door. Both Ollie and his father, P.D. Edmunds, ran to Shadowan, Ollie to the front door, and his father to the north door. The man with his shotgun shot P.D. from 20 feet away and then fled the campus. Although they got Ollie's father to the hospital as quickly as possible, he died soon after from the severity of the gunshot wound to his abdomen. The next day, 26-year-old African-American Clayton Bell was found, arrested, and charged with murder. Bell reportedly confessed, saying he was drunk and he was very sorry for what he had done. Nevertheless, his official plea was not guilty. According to publications about the crime, the trial was convened very quickly, and testimony lasted just 13 minutes. The jury deliberated for only 6 minutes before finding Bell guilty. He was given a death sentence about 80 hours after the crime had taken place. He would be sent to Rayford Prison and executed by electrocution on January 27, 1931, just 1 month and 1 day after the shooting. Clayton Bell was a Black man who allegedly killed a white man in the South in 1930. The story is sad for all involved and a disturbing example of the state of criminal justice at the time. After this tragic loss of his father, however, J. Ollie Edmunds would pick up his life and return to Jacksonville. In 1947, J. Ollie Edmunds, as a member of the board, was of course well known to those who would select the next president. After being chosen, Edmunds began his work with little fanfare, and not having been a professional educator like his predecessors, the faculty expected that he would be less involved in trying to shape the curriculum, something that most of them welcomed. Edmunds' almost 20 years as president would include several big events, including the integration of Stetson and moving the law school across the state to Gulfport. At the outset of World War II, so many young men went to war that Stetson's law school temporarily closed. After the war, however, thousands of young men returned to the US and enrolled in college under the GI Bill, which paid for their education. Many veterans flocked to Stetson and swelled the numbers of enrolled students. Many of those vets wanted to study law, and the law school was reopened in the fall of 1947. The law school had outgrown the rooms in Flagler Hall, however, and as a stopgap measure, Stetson leased the military barracks near the DeLand Airport and moved the law school, the law library, and the law student housing to the barracks. The buildings were falling apart, they had no air conditioning, and were generally described as dilapidated and primitive. Everyone knew the law school needed a new permanent facility. Although the city of DeLand very much wanted to keep the law school in DeLand, other cities competed to get it. Orlando, Jacksonville, Tampa, and Tallahassee all made pitches for it. Tampa and Jacksonville had the best proposals, and Jacksonville, being President Edmunds' hometown, certainly didn't hurt their chances. But a late entry into the competition was St. Petersburg, or more exactly, Gulfport. The St. Petersburg group planned to buy the old Hotel Royale, a group of beautiful buildings on a 10-acre plot in Gulfport on the edge of St. Petersburg. This proposal ultimately proved the most persuasive, and the College of Law, with 100 students, moved to the west coast of Florida in 1954. Thus began a long period of relative autonomy for the law school. Being 150 miles away from the DeLand campus made it difficult to govern from DeLand. A board of overseers was created that gave broad administrative powers to the law school itself. That power would hold until 1981, when the university bylaws were revised to greatly restrict the board of overseers' powers. Law Dean Harold Sebring was hired to jumpstart the Gulfport campus, and he ushered in an era of growth, expansion, and quality improvement. The first JD Law degree was awarded in 1966. President Edmunds, like college presidents throughout the South, was confronted with the need to address the issue of integration of Stetson's campus. In 1962, Cornelius Hunter became the first full-time African-American student to enroll at Stetson and the first to graduate in 1966. He was not allowed to live with the white students in the dorms, however, and he lived with a professor throughout his time at Stetson. In 1964, 6 African-American students moved into the dorms, and Stetson was officially integrated. One of those students, Jim Johnson, would be the first African-American student to play on the baseball team. It would take another decade, however, for an African-American to graduate from the College of Law. Thomas Stringer, who would become a judge, was the first Black law graduate in 1974. Like other presidents before him, J. Ollie Edmunds would grow the campus facilities. Under his administration, Allen Hall, Davis Hall, and Sage Hall, all academic buildings, were added. A number of dormitories were constructed, including Emily, Gordis, Carson, and Smith. The Carlton Union building went up, as did the DuPont Ball Library. Seen on this side, the beautiful Holler Fountain was installed in 1951. The fountain had been part of the state of Florida's exhibit at the New York City's World Fair in 1939. Edmunds had doubled the size of the campus, increased the endowment, convinced the Florida Baptist Convention to give more funding to Stetson, and moved the College of Law to a location where it could grow and thrive. Under Edmunds, Stetson went from a relatively poor and unknown institution to that of a financially stable, regionally recognized institution. Edmunds had done what he could do for the university and was ready to return to his business interests, which largely centered around land and timber. Edmunds resigned in 1967, effective as soon as the university could find its next president. He left on good terms, having Stetson ties that went back all the way to his freshman year. And as a thank you, the board named him University Chancellor, a largely ceremonial title that acknowledged Edmunds' contributions. Edmunds would live another 17 years, tending to his businesses and spending time in his cabin in California. The board set about finding its next president and eventually came across the name of Paul Geren. Geren had an impressive resume. At the time, he was serving as economic counselor at the American Embassy in Libya, but he had a PhD in economics from Harvard and had been an executive vice president of Baylor University. He had worked as an intelligence officer during World War II and had been awarded the Bronze Star for his services. He helped establish the Peace Corps and was said to have personally known President John Kennedy. Geren was excited by the prospect of becoming Stetson's fifth president. Both the trustees and the faculty thought Geren would help enhance Stetson's national reputation. Geren, who became president in 1967, would establish successful foreign exchange programs on campus and was the first to offer faculty sabbaticals for research. Presser Hall, the music academic building, was constructed during his administration. He also added the first swimming pool, dedicating it by jumping into the pool, fully clothed as seen on this slide. While a pool may seem a relatively minor addition, students have been asking for one since the late 1800s. It only took about 80 years to get one. Geren had great ambitions for Stetson and tried to make many changes very quickly. He started the Brevard Graduate Center at Merritt Island, which would expand Stetson's reach to the Melbourne area. Although graduate classes in business and education would be held in that area for about 20 years in rented spaces, the envisioned Brevard campus never developed. Geren's honeymoon period with Stetson was relatively brief. His rapid changes and new ideas about curriculum did not sit well with the faculty. He wanted to increase class size, which did not sit well with the students either. Eventually, the faculty drew up a list of grievances about their new president. They believed that Geren had hired some incompetent faculty, had mismanaged the Brevard Center, had hired friends for administrative positions, and had mismanaged the university's finances. Looking back, some believe that Geren's ideas for Stetson were actually positive and progressive, but that the faculty and students at the time did not want change. Whatever the truth, Geren realized that he no longer had the support of the faculty and students, and he resigned effective June 23rd, 1969, after just 2 years. Sadly, one day before his resignation was to become effective, Dr. Geren and his family were in a serious automobile accident that killed him at the age of 55. The brief Geren administration had ended without realizing the high hopes that had originally accompanied his appointment. The next president was the first Stetson faculty member and administrator to become president. Johnny Johns came into office knowing that he had to restore confidence in the administration. He largely succeeded in restoring faculty and student morale, increased the endowment and operating funds, strengthened athletics, and made improvements to the College of Law facilities. He also increased the involvement of students on university committees. Under his administration, the Edmunds Center was added to the north side of campus. 6 years into his presidency, however, Furman University recruited Johnny Johns to become their president. He left Stetson better off than when he assumed his presidency, and he left on good terms. Stetson once again looked to a former faculty member to become Stetson's next president, Dr. Pope Duncan, who at the time was the president of Georgia Southern College. Duncan came back to Stetson and oversaw a successful $50 million fundraising campaign. He also started the first private university chapter of Phi Beta Kappa in Florida, a move that gave prestige to Stetson's academics. The College of Law began publishing the Stetson Law Review under his administration. Duncan would oversee Stetson's centennial celebration, its 100th anniversary, in 1983. At the end of his decade as president, he would become chancellor and would live in a house on campus until his death in 2003 at the age of 83. The final president that we'll discuss is H. Douglas Lee. Like Johnny Johns, Dr. Lee had been a Stetson vice president before being selected as the institution's 8th president. Lee oversaw a $200 million fundraising campaign and opened both Celebration and Tampa Law Center campuses. He successfully managed the end of Stetson's formal relationship with the Florida Baptist Convention in 1995. This was a huge moment in Stetson's history, officially ending the university's designation as a Baptist school and ushering in Stetson's post-Baptist history. Dr. Lee was adamant, however, about continuing the values aspect of a religious school, and he founded the Institute for Christian Ethics, the Howard Thurman Lecture Series, and the University Values Council. Under his administration, a strong push for diversifying the faculty and student body began. Many buildings were added during the 22-year Lee administration, including the sorority houses, Griffith Hall, the Hollis Center, Lynn Business Center, the Hand Art Center, McMahon Hall, Belching Field, and the Rinker Learning Center. Several residential buildings were also added, and major additions were made to the DuPont Hall Library and Sage Hall. Doug Lee retired in 2009 and was named Chancellor of Stetson University, but he passed away unexpectedly shortly after his retirement. The history of the Stetson presidents goes on, of course. Wendy Libby became Stetson's first woman and first non-Baptist president in July 2009 and had an 11-year presidency that ran through July 2020. We gathered this weekend to inaugurate and celebrate the presidency of Dr. Christopher Rolke, ensuring much more Stetson history to come. So we'll come back on the video, and we hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit more and maybe learned something new about some of our campus or some of our presidents. And I haven't, of course, had a chance to look at the chat while I was doing that presentation, but maybe Alex has been checking for me, and we'll see if there are any questions we can answer.
Yes, absolutely. We had a couple good chats come in as we went along, and thank you, Sue. That was a fantastic presentation.
Absolutely. So Lewis Long is telling us about his experience. So I don't know if everybody can see the chat, but Lewis says that Dr. Johns taught a Florida history course, a subject he was thoroughly familiar with. As a Florida native, I really connected with what he shared with us. Thank you, Lewis.
Yes, and Lewis also mentioned after coming back from Japan and using the GI Bill, he took the first Black history course offered at Stetson during the summer term.
Oh, wow. See, I'm going to learn things too from the chat.
Yes, if anyone has any questions or any other comments, feel free to drop those in as well.
Yeah, thank you for all the nice words, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I think there will be a recording, as somebody asked about. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yes, we are recording this, so we will make a recording available likely next week after homecoming concludes.
I don't know if we can get Dr. Libby on the broadcast. Can we, Alex?
We certainly could if she was comfortable with it.
If she's willing. I don't know if we got her. Maybe Dr. Libby is, has her feet up and hasn't gotten dressed today. I don't know, but knowing Dr. Libby, she's dressed, and so we'll see if she wants to come on. Thank you, Derek. I appreciate the nice words. Thanks, Tom.
Okay,
Wendy says she's willing.
Excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and promote Dr. Libby, and she'll come on screen.
If you want to turn your camera on, Wendy, we'll get you on the screen. There she is. You got to unmute yourself. Yeah, there you are. Hello.
Well, good afternoon.
And of course you look perfect. I knew you would.
What you have to understand is I was in the middle of putting together some stuff for dinner tonight, and Richard called me at about 17 minutes to 12 and said, "Don't you remember this thing is on at noon today?" And I don't think I had ever gotten dressed and put makeup on so fast and so I could look perfectly calm to be with you today. We want to thank you, Sue, for all your hard work doing this, and anyone who else in the archives, and Alex for doing the technology. Richard and I learned a lot of things, and I think we're also curious 20 years from now to hear what somebody's going to say about our time at Stetson. it was certainly the joy of our lives to be here and to be part of a wonderful university and part of its growth. So, it is interesting to see how often the construction aspect as well as the academic aspect are what people pick out.
Mhm.
Because obviously we're here for the students and for the academic program, but the things you leave behind in large measure are the structures. So I was really, really proud to think about how we help to bring the beauty of the campus back, as well as to establish really financial stability that has helped Dr. Rolke through this period where he and the senior leadership and the board have really made an enormous difference in the university's thriving and survival.
Yeah,
Tomorrow.
yeah, and I think, trying to do something like this in 30 minutes, cover 100 years of history in 30 minutes, it's really tough. So you do have to focus on some of the tangibles, but
Sure.
but you're right. I mean, it would be just so much fun to focus on the real personalities of the presidents and how they did relate to students. And but yeah, I think you're right. What I'm thinking of when somebody asked me, well, aren't you going to do, Dr. Libby's presidency? And I said, I'm way too close to it. And you know exactly what I mean. I mean, I lived through it with you, and somebody else has to sit back, as you say, 20 years from now and think about it in historical context.
Right. I think it would be fun to match, if you have the documents to inform it, to match up what was going on with students then, because there's always movements about politics or civil rights or student behavior that are fascinating and that really help define the way a university operates.
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
thinking about that from back when I started college in the 60s. What an interesting time it was to be in leadership, I would think.
Yeah, I think so too. And we have all of the student newspapers digitized and the yearbooks digitized. I mean, I think there is enough written history that somebody could reconstruct that.
Mm-hmm.
And
I guess it is such a great idea to do this on the inauguration weekend of our new president, as well as for homecoming. It's just a treat. And I hope at some point that we have it, although books feel antiquated sometimes, there is something very special about the books that Gilbert Lycan's book that we have tracing the history of the university. It'd be lovely to think that that could be done and brought forward. We'll see. We'll leave that as a fundraising project for somebody.
yeah, there you go. Absolutely. Well, and I think, Dr. Rolke, this being the weekend that's about him and his new administration, I don't know how many of you who are on the call know this, but he is a real Stetson history buff. And he reads everything about Stetson history. He's curious about Stetson history. So I know he's already talking about that next book and thinking about it. So we'll see what comes of that. And I don't know if he's on the call or not. He may be, and he may be listening to us, or he may not. I'm not sure. But I told him recently that it's his turn to make some new Hatter history.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we'll all look forward to this weekend. It'll be a real milestone for the university and for the Rolke family.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
Thanks, Wendy, so much for coming on the screen.
My pleasure.
We're happy to see you.
Thank you.
Happy to see you.
I'll be around campus tomorrow.
Excellent. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Libby.
And if there's any other questions in the chat, we can get to them real quickly before we sign off.
Yes, Tom Patton said, Sue, be sure to leave some notes for that future historian when it's their time.
Absolutely. Tom, I think one of my proudest legacies is going to be for my currently 32 years, who knows what it's going to end up being, 32 years or more at Stetson, is the digital archives, quite frankly, because we have digitized every student newspaper, every yearbook, every catalog, tens of thousands of photos, and I did want to leave behind a digital record of this amazing Stetson history. So thank you for saying that, because that's our goal.
Absolutely. I see your comment, Ashley. We will be recording this and we will upload it to YouTube after this is concluded.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. This is always fun. I can't believe a whole year has gone by since we did this last time, but maybe we've done an event or two in between the homecoming years. So maybe we can do some more before next homecoming again, if Alex will be my partner again in that.
Absolutely. I'm always happy to do this. I do have word Dr. Roki is watching in the Stetson room. So
Oh,
thank
great.
you, Dr. Roki, for
Hi,
tuning
Dr.
into
Roki.
this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jane Novak, for saying that as a family member. I appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll close with, again, thank you everybody for tuning in, taking the time this afternoon to join us. We do have some great events lined up throughout the rest of the weekend. As part of the inauguration, we have an amazing concert from the School of Music that'll be broadcast later this evening as a YouTube premiere. So if you registered for that through Homecoming, you'll get the link. And then tomorrow morning, inauguration itself taking place tomorrow morning. So that's going to be another great event. If you're local, there is the Stetson Homecoming football game tomorrow afternoon. So we've got, again, a lot of great events lined up throughout the rest of the weekend. Thank you again, Sue, for doing this. We cannot wait to celebrate you, Dr. Rolke, this weekend and all the accomplishments you've already had in your time at Stetson.
Thanks, Hatters. Thank you, board members. And thank you, Alex. We'll see you again soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And in my best Dr. Rolke impression, go Hatters.
We're going to have to work on that, Alex.
Yeah, I got to work on that, but he does it best.
He
Thank
does
you,
it best.
everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.